Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Garden Party, or your virtual series from the Southern California News Group to give you tips, tricks, and insights you won't get anywhere else for getting the most joy and productivity out of your gardening experience, and also maybe help you find a community of like-minded green thumbs, or at least wannabe green thumbs in my case. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor for premium content here at the Southern California News Group, and I want to say thank you to all of our Reader Rewards subscribers, and really to all of you for supporting our virtual programs. By the way, if you are a Reader Reward subscriber attending today, you're automatically entered to win a $100 gift card from Home Depot, which should come in handy for your gardening needs. And if you're not a subscriber, well, why aren't you a subscriber? Go to scng.com/subscribe to find your local paper and join us as a subscriber. Okay, so before we get started, let me remind you of a few things. As an attendee, you're going to be muted, but if you have a question, and we hope you do, please use the Q&A feature on our Zoom toolbar on your screen. And certainly, if you want to make comments, use the chat feature found there as well. We're going to be monitoring the questions and comments and respond as much as possible. Usually our SCNG features editor, Eric Peterson, is behind the scenes helping out. Anyway, keep in mind that this is a freewheeling conversation, but you'll have slides to refer to as we go, and the information is going to be mailed to you after the show. What else do I need to tell you? Oh yes, this session will be videotaped and a link is going to be sent to you so you can share or just revisit some of your favorite moments. It's also posted at scng.com/virtual events, where you can find all or most of our past virtual shows, as well as see what's coming up next. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our resident gardening rock star, Joshua Siskin. He's been our gardening columnist at the LA Daily News since 1993. Joshua holds a master's degree in horticulture from UC Davis. He's also been a landscaping and gardening practices instructor at Los Angeles Unified School District and UCLA Extension, and he's owned his own gardening management company. He's written a book too. It's called Green Plants Under Smoggy Skies, a guide for the Los Angeles gardener. Hopefully we can get an updated version of that coming out soon. And also, Joshua is a licensed psychotherapist, so that's why I like to say he's good at getting to the root of our gardening issues. Welcome, Joshua. How are you today?
Great, Samantha. Great to be here. Orange, we lucky to be here today.
Wah, wah, wah.
And I say orange, we lucky because it just so happens that my garden is full of orange flowers. This time.
And hey, before you tell us anything else, turn your video back on, will you please? You've got it. There you go.
Okay, so here we can see some more. So to my left, we have something called Alstroemeria third harmonic, which is a kind of Peruvian lily. It's a very tall Peruvian lily, and it really grows like wildfire, in keeping with its color. But I don't mind its weediness because it's, first of all, it's very easy to remove. If it starts crowding other plants, you can just pick it out very simply because the roots are shallow, and they make great mulch, okay? Because it's a kind of a succulent plant, actually, so you can just distribute it around the plants as mulch. And it gives you flowers virtually nonstop throughout the growing season. And it's the longest lasting cut flower you can find. It lasts for 2 weeks in the vase.
No kidding.
Exception, yes. And these flowers, the orange, are very interesting because they fade to yellow and then they fade to white over a course of 2 weeks. So I highly recommend third harmonic Peruvian lily. And then to my right is Judy Garland rose. It's a floribunda with a mild fragrance, and I've had it for probably 20 years, and it's a very good rose. There's no diseases associated with it, and it blooms consistently.
And Judy Garland, who can't love it?
Yeah, right, exactly. And now here I have California poppies in what's known as a bud vase. A bud vase, strictly speaking, is for a single stem a flower or cluster of flowers. But here I've taken the liberty of putting a number of California poppies in the vase. California poppies will last 3 or 4 days in the vase. And if you have a longer stem with some buds that haven't opened, it will open over the course of a week. So you can get a good week out of your California poppies. And last but not least, this is Lantana, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. But these two will last in a vase for a few days. And the point is, why go buy flowers if you have lantana growing? Because it's growing virtually year round on your coffee table, you know.
Well, those are beautiful and more beautiful. So speaking of which, today's topic is ornamentals. Can you start at the very beginning about what is an ornamental?
Yeah, well,
and go from there.
The ornamental tree is a tree that's grown for the sheer enjoyment of having it around. In other words, you don't have an agenda. You're not trying to grow fruit. You don't necessarily want to have shade. Oh, some do produce fruit and some do produce shade, but it's just like, I love having this tree. And like they may have an interesting shape, right? Like the ones pictured. We have a mugo pine. This is a dwarf mugo pine, which is only a couple of feet tall. And then we have a 200-foot tall Norfolk Island pine, which is a very distinctive tree because of its foliage and because of its shape. So it's like we're just happy to have these trees around. Although I said sheer enjoyment, it doesn't mean the plant should necessarily be sheared because we'll talk about this a little later on, but pruning trees is really something we do strictly for our benefit and not for the trees. Trees have no interest in being pruned.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but let's talk about choosing these ornamental plants. I mean, what are some of our first considerations on what to choose? Because there are a lot of them, as we'll see.
Yeah, so I'd say the first consideration is really to take into account the design of your of the structure that they're beautifying. In most cases, it's going to be a house. In other words, if the house is a Spanish style with the white stucco walls and the tile roof, you probably want plants consistent with the environment in which you will have a Spanish hacienda, right? Which is pretty much kind of deserty, right? Which means you're going to have palm trees, you're going to have yuccas, maybe cacti. Succulents. I mean, you might even have an orange tree, you know, because oranges are actually
Mediterranean in there, right?
And of course, an orange tree it's funny, you know, that's one I forgot to put in with the fragrant trees. I mean, the orange blossom, nothing is more fragrant than an orange blossom.
That's for true. So you're looking for you're looking for something aesthetically harmonious.
Yeah, it's aesthetically harmonious. That's really what the major consideration is. Yeah.
Great. And so what other things do we have to consider here?
Yeah. Well, you know, obviously evergreen or deciduous, that's another one. If you're more southwestern, you're going to go evergreen, right? Because that's the trees down here are usually evergreen. However, evergreen meaning that they keep their leaves throughout the year. However, if you're more into if you have more of a colonial or a New England type house, even a bungalow type house, you might want to go with something like birch trees, which are native to the wetter, what we call the temperate forests of eastern and middle western America. So that's something you want to keep in mind. It goes stylistically, and then also you might want to go have a deciduous tree for another reason, which is that in the summertime, the leaves will provide some shade, will protect your house, so you don't have to put on the air conditioning as much. And then in the wintertime, the leaves fall, and so the sun can get more into the house, and you won't have to turn up the heat as much. So that's the type of consideration that we're talking about. And also the amount of shade is something that you want to consider, whether you want a lot or a little. There's some small trees, like the mimosa tree, which we'll talk about. It only grows 25 feet tall, but it gives a considerable amount of shade. And then if you're really allergic to pollen, you might want to, there are plenty of websites where you can find whether or not this tree produces allergenic pollen or not.
Right. Good point. Good point for the spring and summer.
For instance, there's an olive tree called Swan Hill, which does not produce allergenic pollen. So if you really want to have an olive tree around, which is a very decorative tree, but not have to worry about the pollen, there is that option. And that's true with other types of trees. Longevity, one point we should make is that ornamental trees, were generally smaller trees, do not live as long as the classic oaks and elms and
so what are we talking here? Decades or?
Yeah, decades. You're talking about probably 30. They probably go in decline. I'm going to say at around 25 or 30 years, they've already be going into decline, and maybe even earlier than that. I've seen certain trees, ornamental plums, for instance, go into decline maybe even 10 or 15 years after they're planted. They still
Wow.
look nice, but when you know trees, you can start to see a little bit of dieback here and there. Yeah.
And related to that, actually, we have our first question, which it seems along the line of what we're talking about.
Right.
Vernita Corda asks, she says, my 40-year-old a crepe myrtle stopped blooming about 8 years ago. Why? Is it a function of age? Since we're talking about longevity?
I don't know if it stopped blooming, but there are a couple of factors that can go into it. One of them is watering. You never ever want to water a crepe myrtle at that age.
Oh, okay.
That will decrease the watering. You want to
Okay.
let it go totally bone dry. I mean, unless we have a winter with 0 rain, but even if you get 10 or 11 inches, which we got this year, that's plenty for a crepe myrtle. Don't water
Right.
it.
Great. So there might be other factors, is what you're saying, rather than
definitely. But
right.
yeah, I mean, it is going into decline. You're right about that. At 30 years old, a crepe myrtle will definitely be in decline. No doubt.
Great. Good. Okay. Well, let's move on. Sorry, Dad.
Yeah. So what we try to do here is give you options, right? So it's like before planting a tree, you want to see, okay, these are the different, because you might not even think, oh, there's such a thing as a vase tree, or maybe I want a weeping tree, right? Or maybe I want just something more shapely, like a pyramidal, or maybe columnar if I have a long driveway and I want to put, the trees on either side. It's just, the idea is to be aware of your options.
To envision the shape that you're imagining the tree to grow into. Good point.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, selecting trees.
Okay, so now when you go into the nursery, you want to make sure there's something called a flare. You don't want the flare to be covered. You see how the roots, the flare roots are really like the bark of the tree. You never want to cover the bark of a tree because you'll get fungus problems. Okay, and so the flare roots that come out, you want to make sure they're visible, right? Mm-hmm. And we talked about this earlier. If you really want a quality tree, you have to order it from a named nursery like a Monrovia, right? That supplies a lot of our local nurseries. If you buy trees under power lines, I'm not going to say that all those plants are lower quality, but there's less quality control than you have when you buy a tree with a name of a reputable grower. Mm-hmm. And then because you tend to see problems where also that you have a problem called being root bound, where the roots encircle the container, and you take the tree out and you see all these encircling roots and you have to cut through them in order for the tree to grow. That should not happen. You see, and really it's a question of having your own nursery that you rely on, that they would not sell you something like that.
This is a good point. We have a question already on roots. Let me ask it since we're on this topic.
Yeah.
Huma Fazili asks, she says, could the roots of a 30-year-old pink flowering orchid tree damage the foundation of a house? Since we're talking about where to plant.
Talking about orchid trees, I don't think so.
Okay.
It's Bauhinia. That's, again, I would say no, but, just put in parentheses, any tree that's growing like right up to the foundation,
right,
could cause some problems. I mean, I have a bottle brush tree that's 70 years old and it's right next to my house. Mm-hmm. No, I didn't plant it. But,
I wouldn't think so.
It hasn't caused any trouble because a bottle brush, it's a small tree. Generally speaking, that's another advantage of ornamental trees, by the way, because they're small, their roots are going to be less invasive than a taller tree. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, sorry, didn't
it's okay. That's a very good question. It's a good question.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on.
Yeah, so this is just a test. If you're in doubt about your soil draining properly, actually, you could do this test no matter where you're going to plant. But you dig a hole, you fill it with water, and then the water should drain within 24 hours. If you come back the next day and the water's still there, then you have to do some significant amending of the soil. Because, and I don't even know if I mentioned this later, but I think we do, but you should not have to amend the soil when you plant a tree.
No, I don't think we mentioned that. Why is that?
That's very important. Well, especially if it's 15-gallon or larger, absolutely not. If it's 5, because what happens is if you amend the soil, then the tree is not going to be comfortable growing into it, right?
I see.
You're growing in a certain soil in the container. Now you have a different soil, and there can be like a barrier that's set up, so that the roots are not going to want to grow into it. So that's the reason you want to keep the same soil that you have when you plant.
Good point. Great. Okay, so moving on, now we've tested our drainage.
Right. So now when we plant it, we want a hole like a satellite dish. And the reason for this is, oh, by the way, upper left-hand corner, it shows that if you were the root, if the tree is root bound, you have to make a cross on the bottom of the roots, and then you want to score it on all sides, right? Now, the satellite dish means that the level of the hole, the depth of the hole is the same depth as the root ball of the tree when you take it out of the container, right?
Okay.
And the reason we do this is because you don't want the tree to sink. That's the most important thing. People tend to plant too deep. So you want to make sure that this way it's not going to sink. The other point is that the most important roots of any tree or any plant are in the top 2 or 3 inches of soil. Those are the roots that take in the water and the nutrients and the fertilizer. Therefore, those roots, we want to encourage them to grow. We encourage them to grow by giving them lots of room in the hole, right? Most of the space is up top, and so that's going to encourage those roots to grow, and that's what we really care about. And once we've planted, then we want to put on mulch, 2 to 4 inches of mulch that I think on the next slide we show. We don't want it to cover the trunk, but we want to make sure it's in place.
You know, part of why I love this show is that I learn what I've done wrong for 40 years. Great. Okay. So moving on, Julie Julie is our production manager behind the scenes who magically moves our slides for us. Okay. So I've seen these. What are they? Yeah.
So it's a means of watering your tree. First of all, you don't waste any water, it's a bag that's zipped. So you unzip the bag, put it around the tree, zip it up again. And there's a little opening there where you pour in the water. You put the whole water in with your hose. It's about 20 gallons. And the water slowly leaks through over the course of 6 to 8 hours. And so the tree is thoroughly soaked. You only have to do this once a week. And you can put 2 or more bags together if you have a bigger tree. It's not only for existing trees, for new trees, but you can also do it on existing trees if you feel there's a tree that needs more attention where water is concerned. But the beauty of it is you just water it once a week and you let it go. Or even
less than
once a week, depending on
hey, related to putting trees in the ground, relating to first planting the trees, Patty Ramsdale asked the question, how soon after planting do we begin fertilizing?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. You shouldn't fertilize for a while because these new baby roots are going to be growing. They're very sensitive to fertilize. So I would not fertilize for a while. And the truth of the matter is, for ornamental trees, I would almost go out on a limb and say it's not absolutely necessary because they're going to start growing soon enough. If you do put on a fertilizer, I would wait at least a couple months, and then I would put on something very mild, like with no more than like 6%, something organic, 6% nitrogen, which is you have 3 numbers: NPK, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. I wouldn't put anything more like 6% nitrogen, and I have it be organic nitrogen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if we mulch right, we shouldn't have to worry about this.
That's what I'm saying. You should never need supplemental fertilization. Okay. I visited a website of somebody who's been growing avocado trees for years. He's never fertilized an avocado tree, and he has dozens. But he brings in this woody mulch from the back of a tree trimmer's truck, right? And he keeps it on, and he's built a very thick layer of dark, rich soil. Okay. And that's what's going to happen as long as you keep that layer of mulch. He said he starts I think he starts with a 12-inch layer of mulch, and it goes down, and each layer of mulch is thinner than the previous. He doesn't need it as much because the soil is being built. Okay, avocados need a lot of fertilization according to the book. He's never done it. So if you can get away with never fertilizing an avocado, I think you can get away with never fertilizing a crepe myrtle. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and
we need shirts. We need shirts that say "mulch is the reason." That's what.
Yeah, really.
Hey, I want to go back for just a second because Yolanda Lixon has a question about the bags that we used on our previous slide. Right. She asked, "Can you use these bags on established avocado trees?" Speaking of,
you can, absolutely.
Okay,
definitely.
Great. I'm sorry. Okay, so we can go back. We were just. Waxing poetic about mulching.
This is called volcano mulch, which you see on the right. You don't see it too much in California. In the East, you see it a lot, and there's absolutely no reason for it. In fact, it's dangerous to the tree because you get fungus problems when the bark can't dry out. Okay, so you want to make sure that when you mulch, you keep a few inches separation between the mulch and the bark of the tree.
Sounds good. Okay, moving on. What else do we need? Oh, pruning. Okay.
So like I hinted earlier, There's never been a tree in the history of mankind or tree kind that wanted to be pruned.
Tell that to the tree trimmers.
Except the only reason we prune trees is because, like you said, they're brush clearance regulations.
Right.
It's giving, you know, it's threatening our house, or it's threatening our driveway or our parkway, where that the branches are going to fall and damage a structure or damage a car or damage a human being. Right? That's the reason to prune it. But just to prune a tree, there's no reason. You know?
Okay.
And this is good. If you're going to prune it at all, you want to do a tiny little bit, and you want to do it kind of consistently, you know, maybe once a year. But when you're pruning, you're not pruning very much. It shouldn't cost you a lot, actually. You just come in, you tell the trimmer, you know, I just want to just tiny, you know, but
just to trim, to trim.
But also because it has to be a reason. You know?
Yeah, I got it. And you were mentioning earlier that the tree trimming guys are great people to befriend for your mulch.
Right, because they'll give you free mulch, right? We're talking about mulch before.
There we go.
Well, where do I get it? You get it from a tree trimmer for free. There's even websites where you can go on and just put your address in, and they will send a tree trimmer to you.
That sounds wonderful. Okay, moving on. Watering. Here we go again.
Oh, here we go. And then, like I said, we said we don't need to fertilize. You don't need to water either. As long as we're getting our 10 inches, our average rainfall here is 15. As long as you're getting 10 or even less, you're never going to have to water a tree after 2 or 3 years of growth. Okay.
Okay. Unless we have extended drought.
And again, but I would also use the caveat that you should have mulch. See, mulching keeps the water in the ground.
Again. Okay.
And so that's.
Oh, speaking of mulch, Steve Perlman asked, can eucalyptus trimmings be used for mulch?
Absolutely, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's no problem there.
No problem there. Okay, good.
Edibles, I might want to take another look at, but ornamentals, no problem.
But ornamentals, not so much. Okay, so we have a lot to choose from. Let's start to talk about our options.
Okay, so some people want an ornamental tree that has more than one season's interest. So, you know, one of the classics, upper left, crepe myrtle. Like, you know, by the book, the crepe myrtle is the best tree to plant in terms of ornamental trees. It's not necessarily going to be your favorite because there's so many of them planted. You know, that's the thing in horticulture. Unfortunately, familiarity kind of breeds contempt. So, but the crepe myrtle, it's flowering. Mine is already flowering. It flowers in June and July, right? And then the leaves change color in the fall. By the way, if you're going to pick out your crepe myrtle tree, you should do it in the fall because they all change color differently. Great, yeah, and the other reason being that the bark, there are certain bark, you can get crepe myrtles with cinnamon colored bark. There's a white variety, it's called Natchez, that has white bark. It has a cinnamon bark. So the flowers, the leaves change color, and then you have the bark, the smooth bark, and it comes in different colors. And I should just make this distinction here. It has Indica forii. Indica is like the old time crepe myrtles. Forii is a hybrid that does not get the fungus disease that the traditional variety was known for. So if you don't want fungus on your crepe myrtle, you got what's called forii. And they also come in many different colors. So. And
speaking of fungus, I think I told you when we were talking earlier that we had a white birch and it died of fungus. So are these particularly susceptible?
Right. So in a sense, I mean, this is a color tree because you have this actually is weeping. So you have the weeping effect, right? And then the leaves change to gold in the autumn, and then you always have the trunk. So, but the birch is really not a good tree for Southern California. Ecologically speaking, right? It needs a lot of water. In fact, people used to recommend it as a lawn tree. There aren't too many trees that are compatible with lawn, but it can handle so much water that it's good for lawns. But it's not very long lived. It gets fungus. It dies from in heat waves. You can see it suffer.
Yeah, ours didn't last long. Hey, before we move on, we already have a question from Kathleen Vaccaro. She says she planted 2 small redbud trees.
Redbud, yeah.
Yeah, she says one is doing great, the other one not so much.
Okay, I'll tell you a problem with a redbud. Never, shouldn't say this, but it's best to avoid planting a redbud with a single trunk. See, the problem is a redbud is a multi-trunk tree. Okay, and people train it into single trunk at their peril. If you get a single trunk tree, let it sucker, because if you let it sucker, you're going to get, because here's what happens. The reason it's multi-trunk for, why did nature make it that way? Because it has gray bark that's sensitive to sunburn. And so if you don't have the multi-trunk effect, you're going to get a burned trunk and the tree is going to struggle. So you want to let that bottom growth develop to protect the trunk.
I see.
So
okay, well, hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
All right, next options, red flowers. Love these.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted, it's kind of last minute, but I want to remind people there's such a thing as a weeping tree rose, okay? And you can get them in red, you can get them in pink. There's one, China Doll is a pink version. You can also get even the yellow rose that blooms. They've grafted it in a way that it weeps. What I call it, Lady Banks rose, the yellow one. Anyway, so just keep that in mind. Again, this is about options, right?
Right.
The coral tree on the left is the cockspur coral tree. Coral trees can get to be huge, right? But this one is very tame. It's blooming now. It has really, really gorgeous flowers and actually blooms on and off between spring and fall. So that's a bonus. And the bottle brush, right, is classic. It blooms on and off throughout the year. There are two types. There's the citrinus, which is just the upright one, and then there's a viminalis, which is a weeping bottle brush.
Drapes. I love that draping quality. Hey, before we move on too much farther, we did have a question about the strawberry tree. Cindy wants to know, should you let the suckers grow on the single trunk of a
strawberry tree that doesn't have that problem. No.
Okay.
And it may be because it's a cinnamon bark too. The cinnamon bark can absorb the heat in the sun.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, what's our next color? Orange.
Orange.
My favorite.
Glad we better leave that alone. All right. Anyway, I really like the pomegranate does give you fruit, but there's also a miniature pomegranate, which you may not be aware of. It's classically ornamental, right? It only grows, I think, 5 feet tall, maybe 6. And it flowers and has little fruit they're edible, but right now the pomegranate is flowering. It's a gorgeous orange flower. Now I have the coral tree here. It's sort of because of local interest, because this is really a pretty large tree, but it's growing on San Vicente Boulevard in Santa Monica. If you ever,
I love these trees. Yeah. That's
really about coral trees. There's a caveat here that the wood is very brittle, and if you have a coral tree, you really should prune it once a year, because they're very susceptible to breakage. That's the one thing about coral trees. And then the last one, the African tulip tree, is one at the LA Zoo. It's just a very glorious tree with flowers that you can see here. Yeah.
Great. What else did I want to ask you about those coral trees? Oh, we were talking earlier, corals are prone to tipping over?
Breaking. Tipping over, right. You mentioned that. Yeah, I've seen them break also. The roots are shallow. If you get a real heavy rainfall, God willing, as we say.
God willing,
But it can tip over the whole tree. So you really have to be careful that you don't want to plant one next to a structure, right? Because it could endanger the structure when it falls over. I've seen many of them fall. Yeah.
Yeah. As I mentioned to you, I have 2. Just one day, went over. Yeah. Okay, moving on to our next color, yellow.
Yellow, yes. So yellow is a color of a lot of trees, because especially all the acacia trees bloom in yellow, all the cassia, a lot of the drought tolerant trees. I would I'll draw your attention to the upper right, the popcorn cassia, because it has the fragrance of popcorn. Really kind of neat if you have kids.
I haven't ever seen that. That's interesting. Does it get very big? I haven't.
What?
Yeah, I love it. Does it get very big?
What do you say?
I'm sorry, does it get very big? How tall?
No, it doesn't get big. It's very, very manageable. 20, 30 feet now.
Okay.
And then, of course, the angel trumpet, which is on the bottom left, is another incredible plant. Some people call it a shrub, but it actually does have kind of a tree form to it. And it's just covered with flowers, this time of year. It's really a showstopper.
I love it. I love to see the little hummingbirds put their faces into it. I've seen that in our neighborhood.
That's a classic ornamental. And then also bring attention to the gold medallion upper left. That's starting to bloom now. It's really, if I was going to recommend one tree for yellow, that would be it, because it's just covered with yellow this time of year. And then the bottom right is Acacia baileyana. It has beautiful, tiny blue leaves, intricate with a very fine serration on the blue leaves, and then it has yellow flowers, and it's only about a 20-foot tree. Really, really a wonderful ornamental tree. And
That
then,
is,
yeah, the
go
golden
ahead.
wattle is actually kind of you can make it columnar. You can use the golden wattle as a hedge, as a tall hedge. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah.
We have one quick question from Ann Woodskin. She asks, regarding the African tulip tree, is it better to be multi-trunk or single trunk?
I think either is fine.
Either.
Usually see it as a single, but you could, anything can be grown as a multi-trunk. There's nothing wrong with growing a multi-trunk tree. And actually they're probably more, what should I say, more vigorous than a single trunk, you know.
Interesting. Okay, next options. Pink.
Okay, so here we have some pretty classic, the pink trumpet on the upper left. So in Ventura Boulevard and Sherman Oaks in the spring, you know, it's like one of the first trees to bloom. And you just see these trees covered with these pink trumpets. It's a very, very glorious sight. And they're not large. They also have kind of a grayish bark. They only grow 20, 25 feet. Very, very handsome ornamental tree. Or should I say beautiful, whatever. Mimosa is the bottom left. That's the one that grows 25 feet tall in a vase shape or umbrella shape, and it grows very quickly to its mature height of about 20, 25 feet. And it does give you shade. The only downside is you have a lot of litter between the flowers and the seed pods. And some people have a problem with that. The bottom right, saucer magnolia, another one with pink flowers and gray bark. It's a wonderful, one of the first trees to bloom. The leaves tend to burn. It's a little bit sensitive to the sun, but you're willing to pay the price because of the beautiful flowers. And then the upper right is a pink melaleuca. Anything that says melaleuca on it, and by the way, if you go to San Marcos Growers, which I'm going to refer to at the end, they have a lot of melaleuca trees, all ornamental with all different color flowers, and I highly recommend them. They're Australian, they're highly drought tolerant, and they have really nice flowers.
It almost looks like a thistle, you know, a thistle bloom.
You're right. It actually does.
Yeah.
You're right.
Hey, before we move much farther, Ruth Wen has a question. She says, most of my pomegranate bulbs fall to the ground before blooming. What causes this?
Well, usually often when fruit falls before it's a question of water imbalance. Okay. In other words, it needs a consistent supply of water. Not too much, not too little. I mean, pomegranates don't need any water, but when it comes to fruit, they do need to have constant moisture. And again, the mulch makes a big difference. If you water them weekly, that's going to be plenty. And then if you have mulch, it's going to keep the water more consistent, the moisture more consistent. You're going to have less dropping, less splitting, right? On pomegranates.
Speaking of mulch, we have a new question from Huma Falzi on that. She asks, what is the best mulch you recommend? How long does it last, and do you have to mulch every year?
Yeah, okay. It depends on the product, and it depends on how deep you put it. Like if you use wood chips are going to last. I mean, if you put on 4 or 6 inches of wood chips, that's going to last you 2 or 3 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's free. It's free, people. And if there's too much for you, you know, get together with a neighbor, because there is some, you know, there's some work. You have to put it in the wheelbarrow. I put mine in my garbage can, and I just roll the garbage can and dump it back. So.
Speaking of which, because we know we can use mulching from the pruning of trees. Joanne Adler wants to double check what's the best time of year to prune the tree, or does it matter?
Okay. Well, in Southern California, they prune trees anytime. You know that. That's how the companies stay in business. So, but there are some rules. Like, for instance, eucalyptus, you don't want to prune during the time of the year when eucalyptus beetles are active, right? Which is usually, you know, during the spring, right? So, I mean, ideally, trees should be pruned in the winter, except certain ones that are tropical and could be affected if there's a freeze. For instance, the ficus, I know for a fact, like in West LA, where we once pruned some ficus benjamina, we pruned those trees in the winter and they went into a funk. We thought they were going to die. They turned yellow, and they did eventually come back. But I had a real friend. I mean, that's not their seed. you want to prune tropical trees, if anything, during the growing season, actually. Because
Got it.
you want the regrowth, you know.
The regeneration.
You want the
Sure.
regeneration. In the winter, they're
Right.
going to just stay there, stagnate.
Sounds good. Okay, we have a lot of questions, a lot to get through. So
Yeah, so the
purple.
purple is actually, again, we bring the crepe myrtle, and there's something called Royal Empress tree, which is it's a magnificent tree, but it's I really brought it, and the jacaranda too. These are not, they're ornamental definitely, but they do get large. So I just want to keep that in mind.
That sounds good. Let me stop for just a second, since we're talking about flowering trees. Huma has another question. Which flowering tree has the longest blooming period, and what is the duration, if you know?
Okay, that's a good question. The longest blooming period? I don't know if there's a, when you talk about flowering trees, you're usually talking about seasonal. Actually, the one that I mentioned earlier is the coral tree, the cockspur coral tree. They call it that because it kind of resembles the coxcomb of a rooster. Anyway, that's one that flowers on and off from now until fall. That's the one that comes to mind. So you definitely might want to take a look at that.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
We have others. We have other questions coming up. So is there anything more for us to, you were going to mention on the jacaranda that it's
a tree. There's something called phenology. Phenology is a study of certain phenomena in nature that indicate the periodicity of other phenomena. In other words, when certain trees bloom, then you know a certain type of weather is coming. So for instance, when jacaranda tree blooms, you know that the hot weather is about to begin, okay? And it can vary from one year to the next, but it's almost like the tree has this knowledge, if you want to call it that, of when the hot weather is going to begin. And jacarandas usually bloom around that time, usually sometime in May. And that's when you know that summer is here.
Yes, great, perfect. All right, let's move on.
So here's Fragrant Flowers, and actually probably the one that's most fragrant, although these are, it's funny, you know, I really should have brought citrus, because citrus has something called a migrant fragrance. What's a migrant fragrance? A migrant fragrance is a fragrance that you smell without putting your nose in the flower, because it migrates throughout the garden. And that's the real advantage of growing an orange tree or a lemon tree. Now, these flowers are fragrant, but it doesn't migrate, right? So you have to stick your nose in it. The most familiar is going to be Magnolia grandiflora, bottom right. And you think of grandiflora, you think of the real big magnolia, but there are many varieties now that are within the 25-foot limit. You see, I know I've seen them as a street tree in mid Wilshire in Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles,
they're very popular because the leaves are kind of a
waxy
brown. On the underside, very attractive, and then they're going to flower. I highly recommend. There's one called Little Gem. It's a magnolia tree, you know, and it's extremely manageable, and it grows, like I said, only to about 20 feet. Wonderful tree, evergreen.
While we're on the topic of magnolia tree, actually, Susan Reynolds has a question for you. She says, our magnolia tree is at least 20 years old and the roots are above ground near the trunk. Will it hurt the tree to put plants around the trunk to hide the roots?
Never do that. Never plant around. I know some people do it, like their tree wells and this and that. Never ever plant around the tree, because what happens is those roots those are the flare roots. It's like planting against the bark of a tree, which you never want to do, because you're inviting fungus problems. So yeah, you want to
good to know. Good to know. Okay, next up.
Fragrant. Well, I should bring our attention to there are two bays that are related. There's a bay laurel, which is the fourth tree from the left, or the second from the right. That's where you get your bay leaves from. So if you grow a bay laurel, you're going to have a lifetime supply of bay leaves, right? Which are not cheap. And the thing about a bay tree is it's very flexible in terms of how you want to grow it. Some people grow it as an informal hedge. It gets 3 feet tall. Some people grow a formal hedge of 3 feet tall, or maybe an informal hedge. It gets 5 or 6 or 8 feet tall. And if you want to let it grow, it'll turn into a 40-foot tree. So, but it's good to know it's out there. Now you have California bay, which is a relative of the bay laurel, and it's a California native, which actually also gets extremely large. You can keep it smaller. You can hedge it. The leaves are more, yes, you can use it for cooking, but it's a much stronger spice. So you want to do it with discretion and maybe experiment with it a little bit before you go whole hog.
That sounds good.
And then the California sycamore on the left, after a rain, there's nothing that smells nicer than a sycamore tree. There's a fragrance that migrates from it, from the foliage. Californians and cedar is another, I mean, anything that has cedar or pine or cypress is probably going to give you some sort of that
fragrance.
typical fragrance, yeah.
Right.
Then we have a peppermint tree on the right, which is also a weeping tree from Australia that is something you want to consider.
Australian foliage seems to do really well in our climate because of
I mean,
our drought.
The acacia, the bottle brush, all these come from Australia. Yeah.
From Australia. Okay, moving on. Flowering.
What do they call flowering fruit tree? Or they call them, like, you'll see it advertised, a flowering peach, a flowering plum, a flowering apricot, flowering cherry. What it means is these are authentic plums and peaches and cherries, but they're not grown for their fruit, right? They will produce fruit, and a couple of them may be somewhat edible, never that sweet, but you're really growing it for the flowers. And this is like classic ornamental, because these trees are very short. The bloom time is very, very limited, right? You're talking maybe 6 weeks max, but we don't care, right? It's like the mall in Washington, D.C. with the cherry trees. And if you live in the valley, if you ever go to Balboa Park in the spring, you have the bottom right, the pink cloud cherry tree. I mean, it just, all along the entrance of this park, they have these pink cloud cherry trees, and it's just magnificent, right? And on the bottom left, I'd also go, I saw this tree in the Descanso Gardens. They have this Taiwan flowering cherry. Unbelievable. It's just, you can imagine a tree covered with these.
I know, it's so beautiful. We actually have a question, since we're on the topic of beautiful flowering trees.
Yeah.
Patricia Dreyfus says she lives in an area that limits the height of trees due to the height of a one-story house because of views.
Right.
What trees would you recommend? Any of these trees, or anything we've mentioned?
Okay,
so
well,
far?
we're getting it, but one that's classic is a Japanese maple. That's a gorgeous tree. Gosh, where was I the other day? I was just somewhere where I saw one. I was over at the Cal State Northridge campus. They grow in a lot of shade. That's one thing. I shouldn't say a lot. Don't bury it in the shade, but they can definitely handle a certain amount of shade, which is advantageous sometimes. But yeah, that's one I would definitely recommend. But most of the trees here, one-story house, I would say they'd be compatible. I mean, you always want to check, right? I mean, you go, you can see how tall I get. But yeah, I would go with the Japanese maple. Also the bottle brush is definitely one story. And then that earlier where we saw the mimosa tree, the Albizia julibrisson is one.
Coral trees as well. Coral trees as well. You just want to stick away from the
one coral tree I mentioned. Yeah, the coxswain coral. By the way, anybody who wants to email me, Joshua@perfectplants.com. I'd be happy to answer individually.
And folks, we're going to have that on the slide at the end, so don't worry. You're going to see that again.
Communicate with anybody.
Excellent. We're starting to get a lot of questions piling up, so I just want to make sure we get through all of the foliage.
I don't know what we're going to get through.
If we can.
Yeah, let me draw your attention to the bottom right. The baby blue eucalyptus. This is a tree that if you keep it in the juvenile stage, see, eucalyptus has this quality there's one shape of leaf in its juvenile state and one in its adult state when it starts to flower. Now, the baby blue eucalyptus, you want to keep it in its juvenile state because that's the state where you have these shish kebab leaves, right? People use it, you want to use it in a flower arrangement. So you keep it like that, and you're going to have an endless supply. You're going to have a lot of suckers, right? You're only going to get 5 or 6 feet tall, and then you're always going to have these suckers coming up, and you clip them off. Upper right is that Acacia baileyana that we mentioned before. You can see the flowers, and then you can see the silvery foliage. And the weeping mayal, the Acacia pendula, I wanted to bring your attention because of the it's a weeping tree, and it has silvery foliage, and it's really, you can see it at the South Coast Botanical Garden in I think it's Palo Verde, Palo Verde Peninsula, I think. Go to the South Coast Botanical Garden, you'll see an excellent example of that tree.
Hey, Joshua, we have a question that I didn't see until now from Ann Woodskin, wanting to know about the poison and the poison quality of any of these trees.
Okay, that's a good question.
Yeah.
You know, the truth is, there's no plant that doesn't have some poisonous quality. It's either the leaves, the roots, the berries. So it's best to investigate. I mean, later we talk about oleander. Oleander is one that's definitely toxic. You don't want little kids around if they swallow a leaf. Could be dangerous, right?
Absolutely.
But for the most part, I'm thinking of the ones we've gone through, and I think I'll tell you one that's toxic is the angel trumpets. You know. Why is it called angel trumpets? Because if
they call you home. Yeah.
If you eat it, you might hear angel trumpets. But I mean,
terrible.
If you go in the right direction. But
but so bad.
But yeah, that's one. That's toxic. Anything interesting, you know, because that's related to the potato and the tomato.
Oh, interesting.
And the potato especially, you know, is known. The potatoes turn green, you're not supposed to eat them, right? They're toxic, right? Or cut away the green anyway. So yeah, that would be in the toxic category.
She also mentions the popcorn plant that we had earlier as being potentially toxic. So that's something to consider.
Oh, she said it is toxic. She knows that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what she said in the note.
Yeah.
So it's something to Google before you put in your yard.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. So moving on. We've only got a few minutes left. This goes by so fast. I can't believe it.
Let me just focus on one plant here because I think it's an upper left Chinese tallow tree. I think it's the most glorious tree in terms of the color of the fall. That you get these neon reds and oranges and golds, and I don't think there's anything that can compete with it. Plus, it's a very small tree. See, that's the bonus. These other ones tend to get large. Well, Modesto ash is also. If you want something gold, plant a Modesto ash, and it doesn't get too big.
And that was developed for California.
Yeah,
right?
it was developed in California. Yeah, Modesto.
Right. Great. Okay. Exotic form. I love this. Okay, talk about these trees.
Yeah. So you know, we have two tree ferns that are really nice, and also they don't. If you have like a shady spot. Right. And again, I don't mean total dark shade, but you know, just a little bit of filtered sun. You're talking about New Zealand, the New Zealand tree fern and the Australian. So these are two you want to keep in mind. And then we have this very curious thing called a corkscrew willow, where all the parts of the tree are twisted like corkscrews, the stems, the flowers, the leaves. And the forest pansy is an incredible tree. It grows about 8 or 10 feet, and it just has these incredible this purple foliage and pink flowers, and it's something you really want to think about. And the Hollywood juniper, you know, Hollywood, right? It has to be doing something. I'd say weird, no. And it's doing something demonstrative, right? Exhibition, right? It just grows these different arms and these different shapes. You don't have to.
It draws attention to itself. Okay, fair enough. I've seen those at a few homes. Oh, colorful bark.
Colorful bark, yeah. We have to talk about the rainbow eucalyptus, which is more. There's a famous one just outside the UCLA Botanical Garden, and it's really an incredible. The bark has these colors that you don't see in any other tree. And then when you talk about native trees, at the end when we mentioned native plant nurseries, you're going to find a lot of these trees. On the bottom, 3 of the trees, right? The Catalina ironbark, the river birch, and the Palo Verde are all California native, so you should be able to find them in native plant nurseries.
Oh, wait, since we have palms here, we have a question that we've had for some time from Shin Young Chung, who says that they've got 8 queen palms and they've had them for over 35 years.
Oh yeah.
The flower and the seeds are the headaches though. Or is there any way to slow down that growth? No. You're shaking your head.
No, that tree is a headache. You're constantly pruning that tree.
Okay.
You might, you'd have to check the label, but there is something that inhibits the development of fruit or seeds, because I know the seeds can be a problem with the fruit.
Yeah.
Spray it on the flowers and then you don't get fruit. It's called the tree. Monterey is a company, Ethifon, ETHEPHON. It's actually a naturally occurring hormone. Okay. And what you're doing really when you spray it, you elicit the hormone it's a hormone that causes things to drop off of trees. right? Flowers and fruit. So what it'll do, it'll cause the flowers to drop before they can turn into fruit. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Very helpful. Okay, next.
So here we have weeping trees. Some people like, yeah, the one on the left, weeping blue atlas cedar. It's slow, but you can see it's really magnificent when it grows. And then the bottom right is the blue weeping juniper. Second from left is the maton tree. You really want to take a look. This is a really, really nice tree. Really nice. You don't really appreciate. It's a very fresh green on it, and it just really. I highly, highly recommend it. Weeping willow actually is almost put here to be cautious because weeping willows do not grow well in Southern California.
I was just going to say that's another tree
a
we
lot of
managed to
diseases.
kill.
They don't last long. So
yeah. But the maton tree does well in our climate.
Yes, very well. Something to consider.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, next up.
Succulent
my
trees.
favorites. We see these everywhere.
Yeah.
I love the Peruvian apple cactus. That's one of my
and you can eat
It
those
gets quite
too.
tall.
You can eat those. You know, they're edible fruit. So yeah, that can get very large. The dragon tree is famous. That can live to be 1,000 years old. And then I like this ponytail palm in the middle at the top. It's a very that can get huge. I shouldn't say huge. It can get to 20, 25 feet, but it has this. Some people call it elephant's foot because it has a trunk that looks like an elephant's foot.
Yes, I've heard that it referred to as that. I didn't realize it was the same. It was the same plant.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was saying on the far right, you have two trees that are just absolutely magnificent. I don't think the photographs do them justice, but the McDougall's for Korea on the bottom right is this incredible tree. It grows up, and I don't know. Just take a look at it. And also the beaked yucca is another one with just incredible foliage. And when you take the thatch off of the trunk, it's really. Go ahead. You were going to ask.
I was going to say, well, that ponytail palm is in a pot, so let's start to talk about.
Right, and we're getting there, right? We're getting to the pot. Yeah.
Julie, next slide, please.
Okay,
there we go.
So here's some trees that are very conducive to growing in containers. They're slow. We have two cycads here, right? We have the sago palm, everybody knows about. And then we have a relative cycad, which is called the Eastern Cape Blue Cycad Encephalartos horridus, because it's a very prickly, the leaves have prickles, but it's a magnificent plant. They're very expensive, by the way. But this is like an heirloom. This is a type of plant, you hand down from one generation to the next.
Oh, that's fascinating.
It's a small tree. If you really want to see an incredible collection of cycads, go to the LA County Arboretum in Arcadia. They have a really wonderful collection there. Then there's the cardboard palm, which is another very slow grower, and the foliage is like palm. Then you have a European fan palm, which I want to mention. There's also a silver variety, a silvery blue European fan palm. This is the only palm that's native to Europe. You find it in Spain.
Oh, fascinating.
And so it's a very drought. It's really one of the best container plants you can grow.
Speaking of container plants, you always mention that it's very key to water this in a regular.
Yeah, right. Don't take anything we said before about minimizing water with mulch. With trees, you have to be constantly in attendance. If you go away for a really hot weekend, you never know. The tree might flop.
Okay, we're running out of time, sadly. So let's move on to our.
Yeah. So this is just sort of to give you topiary. Now this is just poodle trees. It's interesting. People are crazy about these trees. I once talked to a sales rep from a large nursery, and they said they can't make enough of these trees. People just go crazy for these trees. So if you want to do it yourself, you can do it yourself, right? And of course, topiary, people make, they get frames like chicken wire frames in the shape of a dog or a bear. And there are certain plants you can plant, like the Eugenia is one that fills up the, the shape, the mold, right? And then you have a dog in your front yard.
Sounds good. Okay, let's move on. Espalier.
Espalier, yes. This is growing something like if you have a garage, right? A side of a garage, it's just very boring, right? You do something like this. Pyracantha in the middle is a really good one because it's very, very fruitful. It's an ornamental, right?
That's interesting. I haven't seen some of these. I've seen the bottle brush done as an espalier, but I've never seen olive, at least not in my neighborhood.
Yeah, anything with flexible branches is conducive to this. Like apple stems are very, very flexible, and so you can do that with apples. And actually, there's a hormonal issue it promotes more fruit growth when you grow plants horizontally. Okay,
Oh,
so you
wow.
actually get a heavier harvest by doing espalier per
That's
square foot.
fascinating.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Can you do it with oranges too? Just out of curiosity.
No, you could try it.
Yeah.
It's really not seen.
Okay.
I mean, theoretically, you can do this with anything, you know.
Interesting. Okay. Moving on. Bonsai.
Well, bonsai, we have to bring it in because it's an ornamental tree. And one thing people need to, you may get a bonsai tree as a gift sometime. You have to grow it outdoors, okay? If you put it inside, it's going to die. So that's something to keep in mind.
Even though it looks small and delicate. It's
Yeah,
not. It's
exactly.
still a
That's the
tree,
point.
right?
It looks so small
Yeah.
and delicate, and there are some that are 1,000 years old. There's the oldest trees are they actually have a sort of like a museum in Italy that's devoted to bonsai, and there's some 1,000-year-old trees. But you can actually do one yourself. You know, if you have a plant in a 1-gallon container and you just keep taking it out and pruning the roots, you can keep it at a pretty small size. I mean, it's not classic bonsai, obviously. And if you really want to get into bonsai, I've given you a link here, or a website of the California Bonsai Society. You go there, you're going to find 20 different bonsai societies throughout Southern California where you can go and you can learn. And then if you want lessons right away, I think every Saturday they have lessons at this Kimura Bonsai Nursery in Northridge. So.
Speaking of how-to, we have one more how-to question from Marianne Campagne. She asked, how do you attach the Espalier trees?
So you have to do it with, people usually use it with, they nail in wire, right?
Uh-huh.
And they'll nail it into the wall, they'll fasten it to the wall in some manner, right?
Okay.
And that, you can find that information on. Yeah.
Okay, sadly, we're running out of time. Do we have a few more
Oh, good.
references?
Yeah, this is good because these trees, if you have these 2 books, you've got it covered. In terms of ornamental trees, well, the left book is actually a lot of ornamental plants in general, but the one on trees is just unbelievable. It's classic. It's got everything we've talked about today and a lot more. So I highly recommend it. And you can find
great.
And then here, so Monrovia and San Marcos, there would be the sources for ornamental trees, but they're wholesale growers. So what you do is you go to their websites and you see what nurseries are supplied, that they supply, and then you call up one of those nurseries and you special order any of the trees that you see in their catalog. And then you have Moon Valley Nurseries that they grow trees, particularly that's their emphasis. And then Bothing Treeland, which is in Woodland Hills in the San Fernando Valley, is also explicitly trees. I mean, any nursery sells trees, but you want to get more trees. And then the native plant nurseries on the bottom left, that's you're going to find those, especially with the colorful bark, right? That's where you want to go.
Okay, perfect. Well, listen, this is again such an education. Thank you, Joshua. Sadly, that's all the time we have today. It goes by so fast.
Yeah.
oh, wait, you did have one more thing for us.
Yeah, this is actually paraphrasing the poem at the beginning of the presentation. But all I wanted to say was, webinars are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree.
And on that note, we will see you next time. Just to remind everybody, Joshua's column runs in Saturday's paper and online in all of our publications. His website is thesmartergardener.com. And if you want more gardening insights from our experts, sign up for our Garden Party newsletter. And now there's a good, I've forgotten how to talk. Now's a good time to catch up on all of our old virtual programs you might have missed. So go to scng.com/virtual events. By the way, this Friday on Bookish, join us for bestselling author Dawn Winslow, Vanity Fair writer Mark Rosso, and more. If you'd like to share your thoughts from today, or if you have additional questions, please email us at events@scng.com, and we will absolutely forward things on to Joshua. Don't worry. Our next program will be all about avocados and other fruit trees. So join us again next month. And hey, if you're not a subscriber but want to get in on all the entertainment and information we offer, give us a call, 877-469-6133. Thanks again for your support. We'll see you next time. Bye.